Have you ever trusted someone so deeply you couldn't imagine betrayal coming from the very heart of your own family? What if the woman you loved was sleeping with her own adoptive father? What if the boy she called her younger brother was actually her hidden son? This isn't just a story of cheating. It's a story of secrets buried so deep. They grew roots into generations. Stay with me, because what I discovered shattered everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from the ones closest to you, this story is for you. Like, share and subscribe to Lies Unveiled, where every truth cuts deep. When people saw us, they said we looked like a picture-perfect family. My wife, Aria, was graceful and kind. Her adoptive parents were well-respected in the community, and her younger brother, Leo, was a quiet, talented teenager. We had a modest home, a beautiful 5-year-old son named Nathan, and on the outside, it all looked like the dream life. I met Aria in college. She was the kind of woman that made people turn their heads in awe, not just because of her beauty, but because of how composed she was. There was always an air of mystery around her, but I chalked it up to her difficult childhood. She had been adopted after being abandoned as an infant. Her adoptive father, Dr. Gregory Hart, was a prominent figure, a surgeon and a philanthropist. Her adoptive mother, Elaine, was more reserved, often overshadowed by her husband. Aria rarely spoke of her past, especially of her childhood. When she did, it was with a strange mix of reverence and detachment. She said she owed everything to Dr. Hart, who took her in and gave her a life she never could have dreamed of. When we married, I was welcomed into the Hart family with open arms. Gregory was charming, generous, even paternal towards me. But there were things, small things, that didn't sit right, like the way his eyes lingered too long on Aria when she wasn't looking, or the way he'd brush her shoulder when passing by. Too familiar, too intimate. At first, I dismissed them. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. After all, this was her adoptive father. She grew up calling him Dad. He paid for her college, her first car, even contributed to the down payment on our house. He was always just there, too generous, too available, too involved. Things started to shift when Leo moved in with us for a few months during his gap year. Aria said he needed stability and guidance before college. I agreed, but something about their dynamic didn't add up. He didn't treat her like a sister. He was respectful, yes, but there was tension, an unspoken weight in their conversations. One night, I came home late from work and found the lights dimmed. Aria was asleep on the couch, or at least pretending to be. Leo sat beside her, watching something on her phone. They both jumped when I walked in. "Everything okay?" I asked. Leo nodded too quickly. "Yeah." She was showing me a movie clip. Just fell asleep. He left the room awkwardly, and Aria stirred, rubbing her eyes like she hadn't just been caught doing something wrong. I brushed it off, again, but a seed of doubt had been planted, and I had no idea just how deep the roots went. Sometimes betrayal doesn't scream. It whispers, and it started with little things. She changed the shampoo, switched to a scent I didn't recognize, sweet, expensive, not the usual lavender she always loved. I asked once. She brushed it off, said the store ran out of the old one. But it wasn't just that. She locked her phone, started bringing it into the bathroom, answered texts with her back turned. I caught her smiling at the screen once. When I asked who it was, she said it was just a meme from her brother. But the way her eyes sparkled, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt intimate. Then came the missed dinners. The excuses. I'm helping Mom. I'm driving my little brother to his tutoring. Dad needs help organizing the attic. Each time, I wanted to believe her, because that's what trust does. It makes you ignore the alarms until they're deafening. But deep down, something shifted. I could feel it in the way she avoided my gaze, in how she hesitated when I said I loved her, in the cold distance between our bodies at night. The worst betrayals aren't loud. They unfold slowly, beneath the surface, like poison seeping into your blood. You don't notice until you're already dying inside. And I was. The final straw came on a Tuesday. She said she was visiting her mother, but her mother called me that evening to check in. Said she hadn't seen my wife in over a week. That's when I stopped pretending. That's when I started watching. Not out of jealousy, not out of anger, out of survival. Because I wasn't just losing a wife. I was losing my grip on the truth. The unraveling didn't happen with a bang. It started with a smudge. One evening, I came home early from a canceled work event. Maura was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she stirred soup. She seemed startled when I walked in. There was lipstick on the rim of a wine glass by the sink. Deep red, bold, not the shade Maura usually wore. But it wasn't hers I was thinking about. It was his. A strange, sick thought crawled into my mind. I brushed it away. Days later, I found a second toothbrush in our master bathroom. One that wasn't mine, wasn't hers, and hadn't been there the week before. When I asked, she said it was for guests. But we never had guests upstairs. I started watching. I stopped eating meals she cooked. I claimed stress at work, skipped dinners. I began keeping a digital log. What time she left the house, what time she returned, her mood, any odd details. I knew it sounded paranoid, but paranoia is just pattern recognition with a pulse. One night, I logged into our home security camera app. The front camera had footage missing. I checked the hallway feed. Static. The camera in the dining room was off. I'd set up those cameras myself. I knew the system. Someone had turned off the interior feeds, selectively, so I installed a hidden one in the study, behind the bookshelf, small enough to go unnoticed. And then I waited. I told her I had a trip to Chicago, 3 days, but I never left town. I stayed at a hotel across the city, logged into the camera app, watched. The first night, nothing. The second night, he came. It was him, her adoptive father. They didn't just talk. They embraced like lovers. He kissed her neck. She melted into him. I watched as they disappeared into our bedroom. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. I had suspected infidelity, but not incest, not betrayal layered in such monstrous deceit. Not this. The man who walked her down the aisle. The man I called family. The man who had stood next to me, smiling, while giving a toast at our wedding. He was the one she moaned for now. I downloaded every second of footage. My hands were trembling. My teeth clenched so tightly I gave myself a headache. And then I saw it, the moment that made my blood run cold. She brought him a bowl of soup. He laughed, took a spoonful, and said, "Did you remember the extra pinch of cyanide, darling?" They laughed like it was a joke, except it wasn't, because I'd already sent that same soup to a lab, and the results were back. Trace amounts. Not enough to kill in a single dose, but enough to weaken, enough to erode. A slow death, served daily. She wasn't just cheating. She was killing me, one spoon at a time. From the moment I saw that message, dinner was perfect. You taste like you always did. My heart stopped. The words weren't just disgusting. They were damning. They confirmed what my gut had screamed for weeks. This wasn't just infidelity. This was incestuous betrayal. The sender, Robert, my father-in-law, her adoptive father, the man I had respected, had trusted with my child, had welcomed into our home as family. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I started documenting. Quietly, methodically, I bought a miniature camera, disguised as a clock, and placed it in the kitchen, another in the living room. One even faced the hallway leading to our bedroom. Every night, before dinner, I switched the SD cards, reviewed the footage, and cataloged anything unusual. At first, I caught nothing beyond silence. But silence, too, can be incriminating. Two people avoiding eye contact, no shared glances, conversations held in whispers when I entered the room. Then came the footage I couldn't unsee. A Tuesday evening. I was working late at a nearby cafe, watching the feed from my phone. He entered at 6:42 p.m. She opened the door like she expected him. No hesitation. At first, they just talked, then hugged, then her hands on his chest, then a kiss, not familial, deep, long rehearsed. She cooked for him. He touched her waist. They laughed over wine. And then they disappeared into our bedroom. I sat there, frozen, the bitter taste about rising in my throat. That was the night everything changed. It wasn't just cheating anymore. It was a horror story. That same week, I took a sample of the food she served me. The stew she insisted I eat, though she had none herself. I sent it to a friend of mine, a biochemist. Told him it was for a personal project. He called the next day. There's trace amount of cyanide. Low doses. Barely detectable. But it's there. Repeated ingestion could be lethal. My hands shook as I thanked him. They were trying to kill me. The woman I loved. The man I called family. I installed one more camera. This time, under the dining table. The next dinner, I pretended everything was fine. Smiled. Chewed slowly. Watched her eyes. She was calm. Too calm. Like someone watching a plan unfold. I saved the footage. Documented the moment she added something to the sauce when she thought I wasn't looking. I didn't stop eating it. I needed more evidence. Enough for the police. Enough to tear down the performance. Each night, I grew more hollow. Not just from fear, but from the death of every memory we had built together. Our wedding, our son's birth, the vacations, the laughter, all of it, a stage built on lies. And when I looked at her, really looked at her, I no longer saw my wife. I saw a stranger, a beautifully rehearsed mask, a woman capable of loving two men in one house, of burying poison beneath homemade stew, of carrying a lie so deep, even our child became part of its camouflage. But I wouldn't confront her in anger. I would confront her in evidence, in strategy, in a trap she could not escape. I waited until everything was ready. Footage backed up to a cloud, samples tested and recorded, timeline documented to the hour. I wanted no room for denial, no space for manipulation. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about closure. Friday night, our son was with my mother. I told Emma I wanted a quiet dinner. Just us, like old times. She agreed a bit too easily. I set the table, lit candles, played soft jazz. She wore that red dress I once loved, the same one she wore the night we celebrated my book deal. The irony wasn't lost on me. We sat across from each other, her smile polished, poised, her hands steady as she poured wine into my glass. I let her talk about our son, her work, her sister, everything except what mattered. Then I pulled out the envelope. "What's that?" she asked. I slid it across the table. "Read it." She opened it. Inside were still some footage. Her and Robert in the kitchen. The kiss. The dinner. The vial in her hand. Her face didn't change. Not at first. Then, slowly, the color drained from her cheeks. "I can explain," she whispered. "Can you? Should I start with the footage? Or maybe the lab results from your stew?" She reached for my hand. I pulled away. Was it worth it, Emma? All of it? The lies? The risk? The child sleeping just down the hall while you plan my murder? Tears welled in her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "You mean the affair or the murder?" She flinched. For the first time, her mask cracked. Not because she was guilty, but because she'd been caught. He said he'd leave everything to us. The house. The money. We wouldn't have to hide anymore. Us? You mean you and your father. Or you and your lover. Because he can be both. She looked away. Her shoulders trembled. I thought maybe there was still a sliver of remorse left. Until she said, "You never paid attention. You were always too busy. Too tired. Too self-righteous." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what I expected. "So you justified incest and murder because I worked late?" She stood up, fury breaking through the facade. "You don't understand what it was like growing up with him. He was everything. My protector. My secret. You came later. You were convenient." And there it was. The truth. The twisted, mangled roots of her love. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had never truly loved me. I rose calmly, picked up my phone and hit send. Within minutes, officers were at the door. She screamed as they cuffed her. Robert was arrested 2 towns over. I watched it all unfold with a numbness I can't describe. As the door closed behind her, Silence returned. But this time it was liberating. The nightmare was over, and I was still standing. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loud in its own way, deafening in a way grief echoes through empty rooms. My home, once chaotic with the sound of family, now felt like a hollowed-out memory. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the place where she used to sit. The chair remained perfectly pushed in, as if waiting for someone who'd never return. The air still faintly smelled of her perfume, a scent I used to love. Now it made my stomach churn. My son asked where Mommy went. I told him she had to go away for a while. He nodded, playing with his toy car, unaware that his entire world had shifted. I envied that innocence, that ability to accept without needing to understand. The media got hold of it within days. Headlines screamed words like incest scandal and murder plot foiled. Neighbors pretended to be supportive, but their eyes held judgment. The school board where I taught asked me to take a leave of absence. For your well-being, they said. I knew what they meant. Robert and Emma were both denied bail. During the trial, I sat through every minute. I listened to prosecutors lay bare every horrific detail. I watched the footage I had captured, now on a courtroom screen. Strangers gasped. Reporters scribbled. And I just sat there, numb. Emma refused to look at me. But what truly broke me was a revelation that her younger brother was, in fact, her son. Their son, born from a lifetime of hidden abuse disguised as love. Her mother, Robert's wife, collapsed in court. Her world shattered in public. Mine had already crumbled in silence. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I didn't feel triumph, just exhaustion. A part of me hoped for some form of closure. Instead, I walked out of that courthouse feeling older, emptier. I took my son and moved away, far from the whispers, the pity, the history. We started fresh in a quiet coastal town where no one knew our names, where I could breathe again. But some nights, when the waves crash too loud or the silence gets too deep, I remember everything. Her touch, her lies, her poison. And I write, because words are all I have left to make sense of it, to turn a nightmare into something I can survive. In the days following their arrest, the silence in my home changed again. No longer oppressive, no longer charged with secrets. It was emptier, yes, but also cleaner. The air didn't weigh heavy anymore. I could walk from room to room without wondering what I had missed or what I was too afraid to see. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was the erosion of the person I had become trying to ignore it, the slow suffocation of my own instincts. The years I spent gaslighting myself into believing love could excuse everything. I didn't cry much. Instead, I walked. Every morning, I put on my sneakers and walked for miles, through parks, by lakes, across bridges. I listened to nothing but the wind and my own breath. For the first time in years, I wasn't escaping. I was processing. Therapy helped. A lot. I didn't go in hoping to fix anything. I went to understand what I missed, what I accepted, why I tolerated half-truths and settled for silence. I learned that love isn't transaction. It isn't earned by enduring pain or rewarded for loyalty. I learned that family, as sacred as it feels, can be built on lies just as easily as love. And when it is, it rots from within. I started journaling again. At first, it was for me. Then it became something more. Stories, reflections, and finally, a manuscript. A memoir, not the affair, but the unraveling of what happens when your home becomes a crime scene, your marriage a betrayal, your father-in-law your rival. I traveled too. For the first time in a decade, I used my passport. Not to run, but to live. Cities, mountains, temples. I wanted to feel small again, in a way that didn't make me feel powerless, but free. Our son stayed with my sister during those months. I visited weekly. We talked, not about his mother, not yet, but about school, about his friends, about the things that made him laugh. He was healing too, in his own quiet way. And me, I forgave. Not them, not yet, maybe not ever, but myself, for staying, for believing, for loving someone who couldn't love honestly in return. The road back isn't glamorous. It's not loud. It's slow, deliberate, and often lonely. But every step is mine. And that finally is enough. The house was quieter than I remembered. Not just silent. Empty. Emma's perfume no longer lingered in the hallway. The creak on the third stair still groaned underfoot, but it no longer warned of secrets approaching. It was just a house now. 4 walls, a roof, and memories I had to learn to live beside. Grief didn't come in sobs. It came in stillness. In folding our son's clothes alone. In washing dishes that would never again be shared. In looking at family photos and realizing half of them had been lies. The world around me had continued moving. Neighbors waved, bills arrived, the seasons changed. But I was paused in the center, quietly piecing together who I had been before the betrayal. Therapy was the first step, not because I was broken, but because I needed to understand how I had allowed myself to shrink for so long. How I'd ignored my instincts, softened my voice, dismissed the signs. Week after week, I spoke, cried, unraveled, and slowly I started reclaiming space. I began journaling. Every night, I documented the days I survived. Some pages were furious, some hopeful. Others simply described the way sunlight filtered through the kitchen window. I read books again, took our son to the park, said yes to invitations I used to decline. Life didn't roar back. It whispered, but the whisper was enough. One afternoon, I received a letter from Emma. It was brief, not an apology, not really, just a justification. Pages of her trying to explain the unexplainable. I burned it, not out of hatred, but out of finality. Some chapters don't deserve rereading. What I held on to was our son, his laughter, his resilience, his questions, which I answered with as much honesty as he could bear. I didn't speak ill of Emma. I told him love can get lost, and sometimes people lose themselves too. But we keep going. We keep growing. Years passed. I traveled, wrote a book, a memoir of sorts. It wasn't about Emma. It was about rediscovery, about how pain can either bury us or build us. I chose the latter. Closure didn't come from a conviction or the trial or even the truth. Closure came the morning I woke up and didn't think of them first. When I made coffee, looked out the street, and felt peace instead of panic. And beginnings? They come quietly too, in the form of new friends. Unplanned conversations. A smile held a second too long. Trust isn't something I offer easily anymore. But that's not a weakness. It's wisdom. If you've listened this far, maybe you've lived through a betrayal of your own. Maybe you're carrying a silence that only you understand. Let me say this. You are not what they did to you. You are who you become in the aftermath. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story touched you, share it. Someone else might be needing it tonight. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Lies Unveiled for more stories that peel back the silence and let the truth speak. This isn't the end. It's just a new beginning.